I'm joined today by Dr. Ken Sheedy, Director for the Australian Centre for Ancient Numismatic Studies at Macquarie University, and Professor Damian Gore from the Department of Environment and Geography at Macquarie University. And they're with me because they're working on a project, XRF and the silver of early Attic coinage. I'm going to start by asking them to tell me what this project is.
The design of the project is, in essence, to determine the amount of silver from the native mines in Attica, the mines at Lavrion, how much of that is being used for the minting of the archaic coinage of Athens. We are interested in trying to work out what issues in the two phases, firstly Wapenmünzen and then the early hour series, what proportion of the silver is coming from the Lavrion mines and what proportion is coming from outside sources.
And so for our listeners who aren't classicists, what date is this?
The Athenian coinage begins under the rule of the tyrant Pisistratus around about 550 BC, and the archaic period finishes with the defeat of the Persians in 480 BC. After that you get changes to the coinage, in particular the types, most famously the addition of the wreath to the helmet of Athena. This is the period of the emergence of democracy in Athens.
Okay, so a really important historical period.
Yeah.
And we'll have a science question now. XRF is X-ray fluorescence, but for those of us who are not science geeks, what exactly is X-ray fluorescence?
The technique involves stimulating elements in a sample, in this case using X-rays from an X-ray tube, and it's the same X-ray tube you might get in a dental X-ray. So it's about the size of your thumb, a little tiny tube. And what that does is bombards the surface of the material down to around about a millimeter in depth, and it stimulates the electrons around the atoms. Electrons bounce out of their shells, creating vacancies, and electrons fall back into those vacancies and give off another photon, another X-ray photon of a characteristic energy. You can use that energy to identify what the element is, and the amount of those emissions tells you the abundance of the element in the sample. So it's a surface to near surface technique. The more energetic emissions will come down from about a millimeter in a silver coin, but the silver will come from about 300 microns, so about a third of a millimeter into the coin, and elements that are a bit lighter than that will come from more of the surface layer.
And so can you tell us, how many coins are you testing, and where are these coins coming from?
In total, we're testing, well, we hope to test about 1,000 coins of about 3,000 known in the world. So around about a third of the world's population of these coins. This is one of the advantages of X-ray fluorescence spectrometry, because it's a non-invasive technique, so we don't have to drill into the sample or laser ablate a hole into it or irradiate it in any other way or cut it in half. We don't need to do any of that. We can take a quick measurement. It's inexpensive. It's relatively fast. It takes us about a quarter of an hour per measurement, and we measure both sides, so about a half an hour per coin. We can measure shorter if we wish, but it's a trade-off between detection limits for trace elements and the length of time we count for, so about 12 to 15 minutes. And this allows us to, because it's relatively fast, it allows us to go through a number of collections around the world. And so what we're doing is we're pursuing the major collections in the world to get the most sample size up. It's not just X-ray fluorescence spectrometry, it's also coupled with some other studies which I'll ask Ken to explain, because that's more his work rather than mine.
So in addition to the XRF studies, we're preparing a new corpus of all known examples of Wapenmünzen and early hour coinage. We're also preparing a new dye study of this material. And many of your listeners will be aware that the only available study of archaic Athenian coinage at the moment is a study prepared by Charles Seltman, which was published in 1924. This used a very small sample, and Seltman ran into all sorts of problems with dye links, which he quite frankly didn't find within the corpus of Athenian owls, so he relied on stylistic analysis and the result was rather disastrous. So we're hoping to implement for the first time a proper typological study of archaic Athenian coinage.
Okay, so this is a coinage that needs some pretty basic numismatic work.
Desperately.
And when you're doing that, when you're developing a chronology and a typology, is the metal analysis going to help?
They're going to mutually benefit. So the metal analysis will, well, let's put it this way. The sort of things we're looking at is whether or not particular issues are made completely of Lavrion silver, or whether they're compiled of silver from different regions. And the background to this is that earlier studies on a very small sample done by Colin Cray suggested that the Wapenmünzen, the earliest issues minted under Pisistratus, brought in silver from perhaps northern Greece, Tsiphnos, all sorts of different unidentified silver sources. And Cray, also on this very limited sample, then also proposed that with the conclusion of the Wapenmünzen, the mint was only using, or very, very largely using, local Lavrion silver. Now, our question is that true? Is that the case? Because if you think about it, it would be rather remarkable, because it would mean that the Athenians stopped minting or silver that was coming into the state, presumably in the form of coin, but perhaps in bullion that they were collecting in taxes, and bullion and silver that they achieved in the form of booty from wars that they've won. So if that's the case, and this is not being minted, it would suggest that the mint has a very direct relationship with the mint, and that the state is deliberately excluding non-local silver sources in the production of their coinage.
So that would have fairly big implications for our understanding of that period Athenian history?
It would. It would certainly give us a remarkable insight into how the Athenians organized their finances vis-a-vis the use of Lavrion silver. Another aspect which comes from the relationship between the XRF and the dye study is that we're trying to quantify, using dye studies, the size of particular issues. And indeed, we're trying to quantify in very general terms the actual output in different phases of the mint. And we hope to extrapolate back from dye numbers, which allow you to calculate roughly how many coins were struck, and therefore the amount of silver that was used. So we're hoping to be able to say, on the basis of current dyes, the evidence of current dyes, the output of the amount of silver being used in this phase was such and such a quantity, and on the basis of a typological sequence of these figures, to suggest something about the increase or decrease in rates of output of silver from the mines.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. And I think that's giving us a sense of what you're hoping to do with the project. There is something you mentioned earlier when talking about the XRF, and I know it's an issue that comes up with XRF, and that is you use the words surface technique, and this is the criticism you often hear of XRF, is that it doesn't really tell you what's inside of a coin, it just tells you what's on the top.
Yeah, that's true, and it's the case with most other techniques. So it's not that problem is not limited to XRF as a technique. There are two main ways of determining the bulk composition of a coin. Number one is you sample it directly and analyze the swarf the drill cuttings, and that obviously leaves a hole, even though it's a small hole, it still leaves a hole. So if you don't want a hole in your coin, the only other way of determining the bulk composition is with neutron activation analysis, which involves sending it to a reactor and they irradiate it with neutrons, and that gives you a bulk composition. There is no technique that is perfect, otherwise we'd all have that technique and nothing else. So they all differ in sensitivity, where they measure in the coin, how much they cost, the ability to bring the technique to the collection or or whether you have to take the coin to the technique. For us, XRF is a compromise between being able to measure lots and lots of coins inexpensively at the collection. There is no way this research would be possible using other techniques, because 1,000 coins would be prohibitively expensive using the ICP suite of techniques, which includes analysing the drill cuttings that you might get. There's no way we're going to be allowed to take 1,000 sets of drill cuttings from collections around the world. But I guess more importantly, for consideration of accuracy of the technique for what we're doing, is that these archaic coins aren't debased like Roman coins. They're very pure. They haven't been deliberately silvered on the outside. So that gives us hope that the XRF is going to be accurate to start with. There's more apart from that. We've also started looking at the composition of the patina using grazing incidence X-ray diffraction. And what that does is you can change the angle at which you look into the surface of a coin and get a sense of the depth of the patina non-invasively and what the composition is. And we bought a suite of test coins which had been damaged by chisels in antiquity, and they weren't of great numismatic value. So what we did with those 10 coins, is we looked at the thickness of the patina and the composition of the patina. We determined it was compositionally simple, relatively thin, unlike bronzes. So I wouldn't even attempt using XRF with bronze. I wouldn't use XRF with debased silver. And what we did was we took these coins, analysed them through the patina, and then we abraded the patina off on one side and reanalyzed the coins. So we did this, and we analyzed the coins using 5 different techniques, and around about 1,000 or just over 1,000 analyses for the 10 coins. And then we were able to convince ourselves and our colleagues that the method works reasonably well where you have relatively pure silver and a relatively thin patina.
Okay, I think that was a pretty comprehensive answer. I think this is an amazing project. I don't recall in the literature ever having seen a project on this kind of scale. So I suppose I'm curious about how this came about. I'm not sure who this is a question for. How did this come about as a project?
I had been interested in the coinage of Athens for some time. I'd been working prior to this project on the coinage of the Cyclades. In particular, I'd been studying the coinage of Sifnos and looking there at the problems of local silver sources and the analysis of the metal. I'd completed a survey of the Cycladic islands, and this generated sorts of questions related to silver use and the economics within the community and the impact within a community of having local silver sources. But as a numismatist and as a teacher of archaeology and numismatics, I'd always been aware that there had been this big problem with Athens. So I'd had, over the last few years, I've had a postgraduate student, Dr. Gil Davis, who took the administrative institutions of Athens as his doctorate thesis, and he wrote a number of papers on the topic. We had been in discussion about, well, if we're both in the field, let's share the load. Let's sit down and try and do a combined study working together of the corpus and the dye studies. At the same time, Damian Gore here was working with the Museum of Ancient Cultures in our museum, and we knew from earlier work he had done, I think, with silver and bronze in the collection of the museum, that he was very interested in the application of XRF techniques for the study of ancient artifacts. So we sat down and worked out what was possible and learnt about the promise of the new machines. And from that, we realized that there was potential there to really make an impact in the study of numismatics.
And so, Damian, why were you so interested in coins?
Archaeometry is what I call my Friday research. It's what I do for fun. Normally I work in contaminated sites, so I got a bit sick of arsenic on a day-to-day basis, and I wanted to branch out into something that wasn't so toxic and more fun.
Well, that's it. Everybody's heard it here. It's official. Coins are fun. The very last question I'll sort of ask, because I think that's covered very nicely, the project you're doing, is if we've got listeners out there and they're thinking, yes, I want to do a major project involving the testing of hundreds, possibly thousands of ancient or medieval coins. What are the kind of pitfalls and difficulties, but what are the lessons you've learnt on the work you've done so far?
I think at the very start you need to have very closely defined questions, and you also have to have a really good understanding of just what your evidence, your particular coins, are going to be able to tell you. So in designing a project and thinking, what can we do with XRF, it's not a matter of simply saying, gee, there's this wonderful new scientific capability about what will happen if I dump all my coins into the machine. Will there be an incredible readout that will give me this unparalleled insight? It doesn't work like this. You still have to do the basics with your evidence. You have to really understand the nature of the questions that can or cannot be answered.
From an analytical viewpoint,
Mm-hmm.
I pay a very close attention to quality assurance and quality control in the analytical program. And if a numismatist or a historian is going to become involved with an analytical program, they should make sure that their analysts are willing to pay close attention to QA/QC. That's my comment as an analyst.
Just for our listeners, I'm expecting going to be mostly historians and numismatists.
Yep.
What is QA/QC in a little more detail? I think maybe something you might explain to the viewers, which I know I've heard you say in talks before, is the difference between precision and accuracy.
A lot of QA/QC is about correct sample identification and making sure there's not mistakes in that area. But that's not the part that I want to emphasize. The part I want to emphasize is that what you just mentioned with precision and accuracy, and precision is how close you can get repeated measurements. And what you don't want is a measurement that is precise but wrong. And that can occur very, very commonly if you just analyze a sample repeatedly and you can constrain your precision, but it doesn't mean that it's right just because you get the same answer. What you need to do is measure certified reference materials, which you can buy with the right matrix, whether it's a gold matrix or a silver matrix representing gold or silver coins, and you have to get the right trace metals in those matrices. And then you have to make sure that you get the values that are certified, and that's accuracy, how close you can get to the true value. So an analyst has to make sure that they pay a lot of attention to accuracy. And in this program, we will have spent about $15,000 on certified reference materials for our program. Maybe that's a bit over the top, but we want it to be absolutely defensible, that that we've constrained our accuracy properly and very, very well for reporting.
Could I add at this point a small note of thank you? Our project is financed by the Australian government. We have an Australian Research Council grant for 3 years, and the underlying financial factor is that without this generous government grant, we would not be able to undertake this project.
Okay, right. So there we have it. We need careful questions, quality assurance, and a lot of money. That's okay. So you're at the British Museum at the moment doing some work. You've just been, I think, to the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. And where are you going next with your?
The Fitzwilliam Museum at Cambridge is the next stop, and then it's home for a while.
Okay. Well, I wish you the best of luck with that. Thank you for coming in and talking to me about your project.
Thank you very much.
Professors Ken Sheedy and Damian Gore kindly agreed to be interviewed during their visit to the British Museum in 2013. The interview was conducted by Robert Bracey and edited for the Money and Medals Network.